Good. Hi, welcome to Strong on Health's talk on adrenals and stress. If you aren't able to make it here and you want to watch the notes, you can send us an email to info@strongonhealth, and the next 5 minutes we will add you to the list of people who can view this remotely by going to prezi.com. Okay, so let's get started. Thank you all. Have a seat. Come on in. Have a seat. What's that? Yeah, come on through. Come on through. It's okay. It's a live thing. They're ready for it. Okay, so if you want to hang out and add anybody. Tonight we're going to talk about stress, a little thing called stress. Every week we have a public health talk here that's available to hopefully not only answer some questions, but more importantly get people asking questions about their health and figuring out ways to become the healthiest version of yourself. Our goal always is to find the next right thing for everybody to do. Hi. And tonight, stress is one of those things that's kind of overlooked in a health way that we can apply things to actually do something functionally about it. I'm going to start out by actually talking about depression for everybody tonight. And not to pick on depression medications, but 1 in 10 Americans right now is on an antidepressant medication. So I think that's enough for us to start asking those questions, right? Instead of just accepting that as a reality. Like there might be something that we're missing. And I find it particularly interesting if you look at, according to the New York Times, 1 out of 4 women in their 40s and 50s are on an antidepressant. Okay? So that to me makes me start asking questions. Why is that? And what's going on with that? And I think stress actually plays a small part of that, so we're going to talk about that right now. So we're talking about adrenal health. Emotional stress can actually make you physically sick. And the reason I talk about antidepressants is because a lot of times when people are struggling with stress and too much stress, the answer too often is it's in your head. And I think that might be one of the reasons that when somebody goes to see a professional, that they're just given an antidepressant, saying, look, I don't know what else to do for you, you're not feeling good, they're trying something. But also would invite everybody here, we're not going to do it right now, but watch a video on nutritionfacts.org entitled, Do Antidepressants Really Work? And I'd really like to, I've played it here before, but I think it's a fascinating video that shows you really information about whether or not that is an effective approach. Okay, so we can't talk about stress if we don't talk about this gentleman. Dr. Robert Sapolsky, he is a professor out at Stanford University. He's a MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, and he does a lot of great lectures online. Again, one of the things I really want to do is offer you resources to do some really interesting investigating into your own health as well. And this book he wrote is Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. He spent a lot of time understanding the stress response and the adrenal stress response. Thanks for coming, guys. Like I said, I don't mind when people come in late. It doesn't bother me. So basically what he talks about is there's this scene that plays out every day in Africa where a lion comes and all the zebras respond to this stress, right? So their cortisol levels go up. That's your stress handling hormone, right? It helps you with that. And they run, one of the lions get killed, and all of their levels go back to normal. So the stress is over, right? So that's what you have these adrenals for. You guys know what your adrenal glands are? Does anybody know where they are? Right, obviously pointing. They're sitting on top of your kidneys, right? Adrenals is actually, one of the ways that people think about it. It's an additional kidney. But they're responsible for helping you do fight or flight, right? What's the opposite of fight or flight?
Rest.
Feed and breathe, right? So yeah, obviously you're going to either be a sympathetic or parasympathetic dominant. And when you have stress, you go into fight or flight, right? The lion's there, we need to run away from it. But part of the problem is that we have more stress than even these zebras, obviously. These are the straws that broke the camel's back. And they come in 3 forms. We've got traumas, toxins, and thoughts. Come on in, guys. Come on in and see. You got food allergies. We got chemicals, not enough exercise. Welcome, welcome. Not enough time in the day to get to the places you need to get to on time, right? These are stressors. All kinds of things that we're constantly running from multiple lines. So our stress glands are being called on a lot more than they were designed to be called upon. So really quickly, just a little bit of science, okay? So the normal stress response, you have what's called your hypothalamus. It's in the top of your brain here that helps you tell your pituitary to go down and tell these little adrenals that there's some stress. So there's a lot of communication things going on back and forth. And when you have this stress going on, it will produce a couple of things, well, multiple things, but two of them will be cortisol and DHEA. Now, I know this is really interesting. This is why I want people at home to be able to view this Prezi so they can see this. On a side note, it's really important to understand where these things are coming from in your body. If you're looking at cortisol, which you need to respond to stress, it's at the bottom of this chart. And it's important to know that at the top of this is cholesterol. Okay, and a lot of people don't realize that. That cholesterol is used for so many things in your body. And one of the most important things is ultimately you have to have it to make cortisol to be able to respond to that. And I also like to point out that there are other things on here that you need, like testosterone, right? You don't have enough cholesterol, then you're going to have a really hard time making testosterone. Also, all of the female sex hormones over here, DHEA, and I know that sometimes people will need some help, so they will go get some DHEA over the counter, give them some energy, right? Again, it's helping replace what your adrenal glands should be doing, and sometimes people feel that effect. But just again, get you asking some questions as opposed to me giving you answers. What's going on with cholesterol that we're trying to lower it all the time if this is what we need it for? Should there be a balance maybe, and how much we're trying to control that? Just something to investigate into. So ultimately, this is even more important when it comes to this hormone, this cortisol. It becomes overly stimulated, right? We have to respond. Your body's thinking, it is so much more important for me to run, jump, fight, get away from this danger than it is for me to digest my food, right? Or to breathe at this moment, right? It's more important to do that. And so ultimately, it starts saying, you know what? This isn't so important. This DHEA, these hormones, testosterone, we need to steal all of this to ultimately make cortisol. So they call it this cortisol steal. And there's been a lot of correlations that people have talked about looking at, okay, well, is this part of the factor in why we have people going through early menopause? Has too much of this been robbed over a long period of time that these hormones are just really, really not sufficient to be able to continue to do things that they need normally? Right? Again, questions that I want you to start asking instead of me giving you answers. So, I again brought up that depression earlier because depression is one of these things that we call a functional disorder that can be a part of what's happening here. But when you really start to look at the implications of too much stress, all of those things that we talked about earlier, there's a lot of things that have been found to be associated with that. Even sleep disorders. Again, we talked about early menopause, panic attacks, blood sugar dysregulation. Okay, we have a lot of blood sugar things going on in our country. So it is a question, is stress playing a role in that? Are we having too much stress, more stress than what's healthy? So these are things we should be looking at. Infertility. Obviously, we have a lot of fertility clinics in our country. Is too much stress ultimately playing a role in that? And if you think about it logically, if you're constantly trying to make cortisol, you're constantly in fight or flight. What are you not in? You're not in feed or breathe, right? So how easy is it to get pregnant if you're constantly in fight or flight and not in feed or breathe? So stress might be a major factor when we're looking at that. Weight gain. A lot of people don't realize that this stubborn weight that people just can't seem to lose could definitely be the result of too much stress. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. So when we're looking at adrenal, what they call adrenal fatigue, we owe a lot to this gentleman, Dr. Hans Selye. Stress without distress. He just looks like a happy guy. I had to throw his picture up there. And interestingly, there's a little bit of debate in the health field as whether or not adrenal fatigue is an actual thing, if it actually exists. And again, these are questions that I would suggest you ask, but I find it very interesting that if anybody knows somebody who's on a thyroid medication were to look at the contraindications, that one of those contraindications is adrenal insufficiency, right? So there has to be some recognition that the adrenals have to be looked at in order to make sure we're looking at all of our, we call our endocrine system working right. So this guy broke it down into 3 phases. And he said there's a phase 1, it's your alarm phase, right? That's when things are just starting to get a little scary. You see the line, you know that something's about to happen. So you get this surge of adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, and DHA. It induces your fight or flight response. Okay, so that's alarm phase. And it's necessary, right? We need that to be able to respond to certain things. You might not even feel stressed or even notice any of the symptoms when you're in that phase. But you continue this, and you start to go into phase 2. Now again, I'm going to give another shout out, and a resource for you is Dr. Eric Berg. He has a lot of videos online. He's done a lot of work on this. Really smart guy and very generous with his knowledge. So you can find any of his videos online. But he created this body type. He really did a lot of research in looking into this and showing that as you go through the stages of adrenal fatigue, you start to develop fat in one particular area, around this area. And some people would hypothesize that that's because your body's trying to protect your vital organs, because there's constantly this stress signal going to your body. But they find that your cortisol levels remain elevated, and then DHEA levels decline, and you become sympathetic dominant, right? And so he even says that this is where you start to experience some insomnia, right? And a lot of people are reaching for other ways to deal with that insomnia, but maybe you just are in phase 2 adrenal fatigue, and that could be one of the reasons you're struggling with sleep. Anxiety, again, one of those reasons that people are going in to see their healthcare professional, and maybe they're just being given an antidepressant since 1 in 10 Americans are getting one. Maybe it's more that there's too much adrenal stress going on. You can't tolerate stress. You get weak or brittle bones. He has what you call the pendulous or hanging abdomen, which kind of hangs over, and we see a lot of that happening. That could definitely be a part of what's going on with this. Acne, facial hair, you need coffee to wake up. Heel spurs, fibromyalgia, all of these things he's saying is definitely associated with this. And then also there's this buffalo hump that appears on the back here as part of that body type that he's associated with that. But also irritability, fatigue, sweet cravings, salt cravings, weight gain, low libido. So all of these symptoms that people are hearing are associated to these major things like what, fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome. I'm not a diagnostician. I would never say you have this or you have that. But I would say, if it were me, I might just look at how stressful has my life been in the last couple of years. Have I gone through more stress than my body was designed to be able to handle? And should I maybe find a way to undo that stress? Or maybe a way to support those tiny little stress handling glands on top of your kidneys? So if you don't do anything about it, you continue to push that gas pedal all the way to the floor as hard as you can. Go hard or go home, right? Americans means work hard until you can't work hard anymore, right? Well, at some point you're going to probably get to what we call phase 3, right? And we probably know a lot of people. My anxieties have anxieties. There are only 2 times I feel stressed, day and night, right? Everybody knows that we have a lot of stress in our country. And we get fatigue, malaise, low mood, difficulty sleeping, memory challenges, and cognitive challenges. And again, I start asking these questions. How is that? Why would I start having memory challenges if I'm having too much stress? What could be a physiological reason for that? I don't know this is for sure, but I'm thinking you need all that cholesterol that started to get hijacked to make cortisol for so long. What's your brain made out of? Cholesterol. A lot of it's made out of cholesterol, right? So you've only got so much resources to go around, and if most of it, again, is getting taken away to deal with this stress constantly, you don't have as much to feed your brain. So that could be part of the reason that you start to have memory problems as well. So both cortisol and DHEA levels are low, and you enter parasympathetic dominance. Right? So just something to be aware of. There's a lot of research out there showing that too much stress is too much, and it starts to have actual physical effects. And you can really kind of get into these details and understand where you are in that and see what ways you can do about it. But most importantly, I really want to remind people that this whole "it's all in your head" thing seems to oversimplify and not really get into the details of the long-term effects of what's happening. Can anybody give me an example of something that stressed them out today?
Star tests.
What's that? Oh, star tests. Okay, yeah, we got educators that are stressed out. Absolutely. Of course. Anything else?
Driving.
Driving. Okay, you do that every day. Anything else? Anybody have any stress seeing their friends and relatives over the weekend, maybe? They feel a little stress, right? Is this an actual lion chasing you? No, right? But it still has the same effect. Your body interprets the stress the same way. And it says, okay, I'm ready to fight. If she says one more thing about my cooking, right? I'm ready to fight. And that's your body's responding to it. It's perceiving that stress the same. So we really have to find ways to do that. And again, for those of you who are watching, if you want to email us and get this list, I'm happy to send it to you. But create a list of do's and don'ts, right? And I don't expect everybody to do all the do's and not do the don'ts. But if you're struggling with stress and you've got too much, this is a great starting point. Figure out which one of these you can do and focus on it. For example, pacing yourself, right? As opposed to pushing yourself to exhaustion. That's really important because you have to find those times to rest. In the blue zones, there's a Blue Zones project here in Fort Worth. People tend to live a lot longer in those areas. They all take time to unwind. That's one of the 9 rules of that, right? So pacing yourself is really important. Everybody feels like we're in a race. We're trying to get to something faster than somebody else, or get this amount of money faster than so-and-so. Whereas it's actually, there's a toll, an actual physical toll, and I want you to be aware of that. Obviously, eating whole, fresh food, I gotta put that in there, right? Because that is going to feed your body and take stress off your body, as opposed to sugar, too much caffeine, and junk food. Junk food, not drunk food. Drunk food, too. I'm sure that's not good for your adrenals. You know, being compassionate and kind to yourself, right? We're finding we're very critical and harsh with ourselves, and there's a balance that you have to strike with that. And it's important to take some time and just not constantly add even more stress to an already stressed person. Skipping meals, I say avoid that. That's not a good thing. I usually encourage people to eat every 2 hours, even if it's a small protein-based snack, even if it's 2 almonds, something to keep your body from feeling like it's going into a stress state and causing you more and more problems. We talk about this one a lot. Eat a combination of carbs, fats, and proteins at every meal, instead of just eating carbohydrates by themselves. Okay, we talk a lot about that over the course of the health talks. Go to bed by 10 or 11 o'clock. Okay, try to follow the way you're supposed to instead of staying up late and catching your second wind. What do you think is helping you get that second wind? Your adrenal glands, right? They're kicking in to help you push past that. Anytime somebody works out so hard that they have to push past a point, I feel like they're pushing themselves too hard, and they're, again, tugging on those tiny little adrenal glands and eventually pushing yourself through all phases of that adrenal fatigue. So there's a lot of things on here. If you guys want a copy of this, you can take it with you today. Yes, okay, I have plenty of them. But also, if you're still unsure, we put together a little adrenal fatigue quick check. And you just kind of go through this and say, that doesn't bother me, that's a 0 up to 5. It caused me a lot of stress. And if you score really high on this, maybe you want to start thinking about the fact that maybe you have stressed yourself out. Maybe you are starting to fall into one of those categories of adrenal fatigue. And there are ways of testing beyond that. You might want to talk to someone about that who can do saliva testing or whatnot. But I find you can really be your own detective and put enough of the clues together to start asking enough of the right questions to say, do I really need to start looking at my stress? And how much stress have I gone through? And how has it affected me? And what can I do to undo the effects of stress? And there are a lot of things, and you can talk to your healthcare professional about things that you can do to help rebuild, regenerate, restore, and help your adrenal glands. So that's the do's and don'ts. But ultimately, we got to learn that we have too much stress, and we need to find a way to get it into an appropriate amount, right? And especially finding ways to unwind. You know, we're one of the only countries that doesn't give vacation, right? If you look at the amount of vacation that Europeans get versus Americans, it's a staggering difference because you need time to unwind, right? We glorify work in our country, right? It's like a badge of honor. Oh yeah, you only slept 4 hours last night? I slept 3, right? And I ran a half marathon, right? So we have to be aware of the fact that we're kind of in a culture that glorifies how stressed we are, but it has its consequences. And if you're really struggling with any of those things that we listed, any of those things, maybe you might want to look into the fact that perhaps you're stressing yourself too much and requiring too much of your adrenals. Very quick and to the point, but I hope it was informative. Does anybody have any questions?
I do.
Yes?
Did you say working out too much?
If you are someone who can recognize that you have gone through too much stress and you've pushed yourself beyond what your body should be capable of responding from, exercise is a healthy stress, but sometimes vigorous, aggressive exercise is too much. You're definitely pulling on those adrenals to pull you through that. So in that case, if somebody is that, I would suggest personally just doing low impact, just walking, easy things that aren't going to, I guess, stress your stress handling lens, right? You don't want to do that too much. Anything else? I want to sign off of here, and then we can get to some more questions so people aren't so embarrassed to ask. But thank you for watching. We'll be doing, again, another health talk next week. So, any other questions about